So I'd like to welcome everybody to episode 3 of Distribution News You Can Use. My name is Mark Munson. I am the Vice President of Business Development here at ACE, and will be the host for today's episode. Excited that you're joining us either live or at some later date when you watch the recording. Extremely excited about the guest that we have today. Mark Hanlon from InsightWorks is joining us. Mark, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Not much to say. I'm what we call a solution advisor here at InsightWorks. So I listen to what people need and see if we maybe have solutions that can address their problem and help them out in any way we can.
Yeah, well, don't let Mark kid you. Mark is extremely talented and a great resource for myself and the rest of the team here at ACE when it comes to specific topics, especially the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is warehouse efficiency. So we're going to spend the next a little bit of time together talking about warehouse efficiency. I've come up with some questions that we'll run through, and I'll ask Mark the questions. He will respond, and I might have some intelligent thoughts here and there that I'll interject. So let's go ahead and dive in, Mark. So one comment first before we get started. So, when you talk about warehouse efficiency and its criticality to distribution companies, it's distribution companies are notorious for running very, very small margins. I mean, so every cost, every expense can have a tremendous impact. And so through warehouse efficiency, we're looking to reduce cost. We're looking to improve customer sat and to maintain a competitive edge because we're all in a very, very tight market right now. So those are some of the topics that we're going to talk about. So Mark, let me go ahead and get started. Kind of the first question I'll throw out there for you, and there's no specific order to the questions, is how can companies optimize their warehouse layout and improve the workflow so that they reduce travel time? You don't have a picker going here and there and everywhere. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's entire companies that are devoted to nothing but, sort of optimizing, warehouse layouts, the physical layouts. But I mean, there's some common sense things that anybody can take on without sort of incurring some additional consulting costs and things like that for people to help you out. Really, and the travel time tends to be some of the highest costs in a warehouse environment, right? I'm walking all over the place and spending half an hour picking a $5 product or a $10 order. That, you're not making money on that. So, reduction in that travel time is important. So, and part of that is the warehouse layout. There's other strategies we'll talk about probably in a little bit, but as far as the warehouse layout, slotting. Optimizing your slotting. So in other words, keeping your, most commonly picked products closer to the shipping area is a big part. That's a simple one, having a pick face where your high volume stuff gets picked first and gets shipped out. The ergonomics and incorporated within slotting, keeping all your more commonly picked items at, sort of shoulder level or waist level, so it's easier to find and pick. Those types of things are important. Grouping common items together. Again, some of the other strategies are around, the more process, but wave picking, batch picking, things like that will have an impact on how you lay out your warehouse. So for example, if you want to do wave picking where you send everybody through the warehouse, every 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever that wave period tends to be, you want to zone your warehouse in a way that makes it efficient for those people to walk through the warehouse in a way and grab everything and then consolidate it at shipping. And then, you get even more fancy if you want to start getting into automation. There's the concept or the potential for using conveyors and things like that to move the pick product to packing much more efficiently than walking it over. Those types of things, I think, are some of the things to look at initially.
Okay, fantastic. Now, do you see, knowing that we and I speak for ACE, I don't know about InsightWorks, but we tend to focus on the upper small to mid market. Okay, we're not. There's lots of other solutions out there that address these kinds of needs in warehouse management for big enterprise type organizations. Not to say that we can't scale, but there's a point where we don't scale to that level. So do you see some of these more sophisticated type picking processes out there or optimization processes out there in the small to, upper small to mid market?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have some customers that are two people in the warehouse, or one person is the picker and shipper, and
Right.
they still do a fair high volume, all the way up to people that are running 150 scan devices in the warehouse. So pretty broad range, and I would say yes. I mean, all of these technologies, and what we talked about earlier, a little bit of the automation conveyors and things like that. That starts to get a little pricier, but some of these other things that we're going to be talking about are actually a reasonable cost, and we see
Right.
most of our business is mid-size as well, 10 to 20 people in the warehouse, typically something like that, maybe up to 30, 40. But yes, they're adopting these types of technologies and processes to make it easier to get their stuff out the door. Because as you said, it's low margin. The more minutes I can shave off a pick or put away, the more money I'm making.
Yep, not perfect. Perfect, perfect. So we talked about workflow and reduced travel time in the warehouse and just intelligent warehouse design to minimize that back and forth and wasted time and energy and effort. Let's talk about some strategies for the picking process itself that actually reduce errors, increase speed. We're probably starting to get into either some process and or automation at this point. Thoughts on that when it comes to actual picking processes?
Yeah, lots. Probably more than you want to hear from me, but there's a few different ways to divide that question up. I think one is the type of pick process you want to use. There's
Mhm.
kind of three common ones. There's order to order picking. So for every order, you got a sheet or something. You're going to go out and pick everything for that order, and bring it back to packaging, pack it up, get it out the door. Batch picking, where you're going to combine multiple orders together into a single pick, and then there's a bunch of different strategies for sort of differentiating which pile of stuff is which order. Tote picking and other approaches, and then
Right.
wave picking, where I've mentioned again, where you split up one or more orders into a single wave, into multiple picks that people wave through the warehouse. So that's the first part. There's a bit of a strategy, like how do you want to actually work physically within the warehouse, and that's going to be dependent on the type of product you're picking, the number of staff you have, those sorts of things. Once you've got that sorted out, there is a common denominator for all of these, and that is really making those picks accurate. So you can be very fast with a paper-based pick, and you can have the best,
Hmm. Yeah.
time to pick that you could ever imagine. I have to walk 3 feet, pick a product, and that's as far as I need to walk, and that can be awesome. But if those picks aren't accurate and you're shipping the wrong product, or it's going to somebody that's validating it during packaging, and they're doing the sort of the QC on that pick, and it's failing, and you're going to have to repick, you've just lost all the gains you
All that
made on
efficiency. Yeah.
warehouse layout. Exactly. So you need to be accurate. And really the common denominator in that is that physical verification at the time of picking, and that's typically barcodes, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the reason it's barcodes is that it's really the most common, most accessible, lowest cost way of doing that physical verification of the product you're picking. There are other ways. There's RFID, there's visual systems and things, which is still a little bit out there, but there's a bunch of ways you can validate what you've picked. But really, everything's got a barcode on it nowadays. You go
Right.
beep,
Right.
and I know I've picked the right product, and
Mhm.
I won't miss ship, and I won't have to redo that pick or anything else. So yeah, step one, optimize your warehouse layout. Step two, make sure that when they're actually out there being all optimally moving around, that they're accurately doing what they're supposed to do. And again, barcode scanning is a good one, and there's lots of options for that. We may cover these later, but you can do also do voice picking as well. That
Right.
doesn't really give you that physical verification necessarily, but you can use wearables to where you wear the scanners on your arms and your hands free effectively. There's a number of different ways you can do that, but being able to physically verify that what I'm doing is what the system thinks I'm doing is very important.
Yeah. No, 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 absolutely. And training is a big component of that as well. I mean, we forget about sometimes just the training and aspect of it of making sure best practices are followed out there, especially with new employees that are coming in. There tends to be a higher level of turnover sometimes in the warehouse. So making sure these folks are trained properly. But I know personally, we've seen tremendous benefits within our customer base from going from a pick ticket, it's printed out on the floor and then you grab the ticket and you go and pick it, from that to just barcoding. Okay. And the cost of entry is really just not that bad, as compared to maybe voice picking technology or RFID or some of the things like that. Barcoding solutions are fairly reasonable and extremely efficient and efficient and reducing and great at reducing the errors. So we've had a lot of success there. So all right.
And not
Go
to
ahead.
interrupt, but just one of the things you touched on, that training, that's important too, right? Where really you don't want one or two people in the warehouse with all the knowledge of what's going on in the warehouse. So this plays into both the sort of efficiency, accuracy, and the warehouse layout. If you've got one guy that knows, oh yeah, that stuff's over in that shelf and that stuff's over there, that
Right.
doesn't help when he goes on vacation or wins the lottery or something like that. What we want to do with the technology as well is we want to systemize that process. So in other words, the system knows what's going on and can tell you what to do,
Mhm.
and it knows how to react to things that are happening out in the facility, right? Especially if we're doing that real-time scanning. I go beep, and the system knows, okay, this is being handled, and I won't attempt to use that product or do something else with it. So we don't need one person with the tribal knowledge or a couple people with that tribal knowledge managing the warehouse anymore. We've systemized it so that the system knows what's going on and can make the individual workers, especially new or temporary employees, more efficient.
Yeah, and we have a client right now, and I believe we're bringing you guys in on this opportunity that they're and kudos for them, but their staff is aging out. I mean, their staff is all getting up there, and they're senior in years, and they're looking to retire. And to your point, the majority of the understanding of the warehouse and where things reside and why they reside there is just tribal knowledge, and nobody nobody else really knows. And so we're like, okay, before they retire, before they walk out the door, we need to get some of this stuff institutionalized, and so that you're not dependent upon them when they leave. So extremely important within an organization. So, all right, so we talked about the picking process. Let's talk about the put away process.
Right.
Are there things that we can do to improve in the put away process to minimize any kind of bottlenecks and ensure efficient storage, and that we're getting the most out of the warehouse that we have, the warehouse space we have?
Yeah, so that's interesting. And it's an often overlooked part of your warehouse operations is the put
Mhm.
away. Like everybody knows you got to receive stuff and put it away, but and how do you make that a little more efficient? And that is also highly dependent on the type of product you're stocking and
Right,
you
right.
know the units of measure that you're stocking, like how you're receiving. Are you receiving pallets? Are you receiving individual units, cases? Do you need to break those apart during
Family,
put away?
right.
All of those things come into play, but there's a few basics that you can kind of keep in mind, right? Um, and again, ideally, you want to pair all of this stuff with the barcode scanning, or RFID isn't not necessarily a bad option
Mhm.
at receiving, right? Because RFID is great for bulk operations, where if I'm receiving 300 lot numbers on a pallet, potentially I can receive that with one scan versus having to break that pallet apart and look for the individual lot numbers. So anyway, from a technology perspective, RFID may be a fit for receiving, depending on what you're receiving. Now, as far as the put away process, there's a few options. Now, speaking specifically within sort of the Business Central world, Business Central does offer you a few different ways that you can, sort of configure your put aways. And what you want to do is figure out what your best practice physical process is, and then configure Business Central to match that.
Mhm.
So what I mentioned earlier about the type of product, for example, foods or chemicals or things like that, where you might need to do a quality inspection, you know, before you put the product in the warehouse, you want to make sure that product is good before you make it available to anybody to use, like to pick.
Mhm.
So you may want to have a two-stage receiving and put away process, right? I receive everything, check it out, make sure it's good, and then I go and put it away. But you may be in an environment where, you've got one person doing receiving and they're not going to receive everything and then go put it, they're going to put the stuff on the shelf as they're recording they've received it. So you could do that as well. So again, some of it is going to depend on the initial, thought process around what your warehouse needs to look like from a layout perspective. Maybe you're receiving everything, and this particular order maybe comes in, everything is pieces. You've got a pick face where you store pieces. Well, I'm just going to put stuff away as I'm receiving it. Or I'm doing, I receive a lot of stuff in bulk. I'm going to want to put that all in bulk storage. Maybe have the system break that pallet apart during put away, which you can do as well. So that it says, yeah, most of this pallet goes into bulk storage, but some of it goes into picking, or in the picking area or the warehouse area. And that can be handy because it reduces the number of times you need to touch that product and how far you need to move, because you don't move all the pallet into the bulk storage and then later on do a replenishment into the picking bin. So again, there's a bit of a rambling answer, but putaways are almost a little more, it's a little more to think about almost in some ways than picks. But
Right.
you do have those different ways of doing the putaway, the different processes, and it's going to be highly dependent on what you're receiving and how you want to actually do the put away. But again, the key tenets, you want real-time feedback into the system as to what's going on, ideally, and you want to minimize the amount of movement and the amount of times you touch that product. So you want to choose sort of the physical process that gets as close to those goals as possible, and then configure Business Central to match that physical process.
But I do agree with you 100%, Mark, in that I think everybody focuses more on the pick. Okay, because I've got an order, I'm going to fulfill that order, I'm going to pick that order, and I'm going to get it out, and it produces this magical thing called an invoice. Hey, revenue, recognize revenue. I like that. And so we're so focused on the order sometime in the picking process to fulfill an order that we don't really think about the receiving process and the efficiency gains that can be had there by doing that and doing that properly, which is going to set you up for success in the pick process.
Exactly. You can't pick if you haven't put it away yet or received it yet. Now,
Right,
I didn't mention the cross-docking as well, because that's another one, right? I mean,
right,
ideally,
right.
if you're dealing with a lot of back orders or high volumes or low inventory levels, you're going to want to look at using cross-docking so that when I receive something, I'm not putting it in the warehouse and then the next day generating a pick for it. I want to move it over to the cross-dock area and get it
Right.
out the door without having to do that multiple movement and multiple touches of that product.
And within BC, you've got the sales order to PO order kind of match there that you can say, identify, oh, I've received this, it's for this, it's designated for this sales order. Let's cross dock it versus put it away, save ourselves some time.
Yeah, exactly. There's a few different strategies in Business Central, like there is the cross-docking functionality. If you've, using receipts and shipments and things like that, there's our order fulfillment worksheet that does a good job of that. There's a number of things you can use to sort of, again, you want to reduce the travel time, reduce the number of times you touch that product.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, so we've received product. We've either put it away or maybe we've cross-docked it. And now we need to ship it. We need to, we've picked it, we need to pack it, we need to ship it. So recommendations there on, again, ensuring timely and accurate deliveries. I mean, we're all being measured by Amazon these days, and the expectation is I need to get it just like Amazon gets it to me at my house. So we've got to be extremely efficient here. So thoughts on the packing and shipping process?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's going to vary a lot by organization. I mean, we've got some customers that ship thousands of packages out a day, and they're
Right.
all sort of single item and very similar. That and that's a very different process than shipping out 3 pallets a day of the same item, those types of things. So it is going to vary quite a bit. But let's say it's sort of a mid-range, pretty traditional style warehouse where we're going out. We've got a few people picking, they pick the product, they bring it over to packaging, somebody packages it up and gets it out the door. That's probably a very large percentage of the people who use that type of process.
Right.
So with that, I mean, there's a few strategies. Again, one of them is, to actually pack while you pick. That's typically done more with pallets and things like that, but that is an option. So that when you get over to shipping, the packaging information, you've got a box that's basically packed that has some sort of label that identifies that order. Then I can ideally, with an integrated system, go beep, scan that box, and I get my shipping label. Right. So
Mhm.
that's one option. We actually do the packaging while we're picking. Alternatively, if I just want to pick everything, drop it off in a pile at the packaging station, then you want to consider whether you need that separate step to validate what you're actually packaging. And it's a bit of a trade-off, because at that point, again, we want the physical verification. We don't want to just look at this, sort of brown box and go, yeah, that's the product, and package it up and go, because it probably looks exactly the same as the brown box beside it. So if we want that physical verification a second time, so let's say I'm scanning out in the warehouse, I'm scanning the pick, I might decide that that's good enough, and I don't need to do a second scan at shipping to indicate I've packaged that item. The downside, and again, that's going to be a warehouse by warehouse consideration. The downside is I could have dropped off those 2 boxes and I could package them in the wrong shipping package. So rescanning them is handy, right? So I rescan everything to validate that I'm shipping it. And of course, for that, we want an integrated system in Business Central so that I can validate, yes, that order matches exactly what I scanned, and I've packed it and everything, and out the door it goes. But it is a trade-off, because it's extra work to scan that item I'm packaging. Now, the trade-off, if you don't scan, is a misshipment. I shipped the wrong product. That is very expensive and time-consuming, because now you've got multiple departments having to deal with this. You've got sales, you've got the warehouse again to receive the returned item. You've got, maybe it escalates up to, management and things like that. You don't want that. And you're paying the shipping cost to bring the old item back. You're paying shipping to send the new, like, you just don't want that. So having that ability to scan those barcodes to physically verify what you're packaging, very, very useful. It may seem like it takes that extra time, but it could save you. Like, one misship is, there's all your scanning costs paid for with a single misship.
Yeah.
Now back to your actual question. That was a bit of a rant. Lots of strategies there. So one is packaging while you're picking, but the high volume guys are going to use conveyors. You might use a dimensioner where you pack it in any size box you want. You don't have to care. You slap it on a dimensioner that measures the size of the box and the weight, and you've got everything you need to get your rates and get it out the door. Those types of things are possible as well. Yeah, and I mean, for the higher volume people, the rate shopping isn't really applicable. Ideally, you want, the carrier predefined from the e-commerce site or something like that, so you can get the label as quickly as possible. But, for the larger, for the, maybe not lower volume, but the more cost-conscious people may want to do some rate shopping, either automatically or manually select the carrier to get the lowest rates. Those types of things are kind of nice to have add-ons, I guess, in a shipping solution.
Yeah, no, and we've seen some combination of all of those things. And again, it depends on, to your point, it depends on the type of organization. It depends on the product. It depends on the volume. There's so many variables there that's why having conversations with clients up front to understand their business and what's going to be the most impactful for them. And again, always kind of looking at that low-hanging fruit and saying, let's try this first. We don't have to boil the ocean day one. Let's try this first and see how that works. And maybe that drives the efficiencies that we're looking for, or maybe it drives most of them, but there's still room for more. And then we can come in a later phase and add to that, or fine-tune processes and those types of things. So again, that's where the consultative side of what we all do, really, really comes in as to, yeah, there's lots of different ways to do this, but let's talk about what's going to be the best way for you and the best way for you now. All right. So behind all these things, we've got people, right? And people need to and want to know. I mean, people want to know, I firmly believe this. People want to know what they need to do, and they want to know how to do it the best way they possibly can. It creates for a frustrating situation for somebody to just be thrown out into an operation somewhere and really not be properly trained. So let's talk about, some of the different training and developmental type initiatives that companies should implement and be consistent about when it comes to warehouse staff to boost that efficiency.
Yeah, and I think the initial approach is always simplify, the systems, simplify the processes and solutions. That, the simpler the processes and systems are, the easier time you have for training, right? And then part of that simplification is really the training. So if you do continuous improvement type training where you're training staff, but at the same time, gathering feedback from what works and what doesn't, and not just, pushing this information down to the staff, getting that feedback, I think helps a lot, right? Because you're going to figure out quickly from the people with the boots on the ground what's working, what's not working, and you can sort of tailor those processes and systems to match, which should, in theory, reduce the amount of training you need to do. Cross training is also nice, where you've got, maybe somebody in receiving can also do picking or, replenishment tasks, things like that. The cross training, the regular training, those types of things, I think help a lot. With the right system, you can also get, metrics about how people are performing, right? So, for example, we know how long it took you to do a pick compared to, maybe your peers, those types of things, and figure out if there are certain people that need singling out for additional training, that type of thing. But again, yeah, I think the prerequisite to all of this is use a system that's simple to use, that's consistent, that you don't have to do a ton of training on, and then your training tasks become significantly easier. And I will say just a little anecdote here. I don't do much of this anymore at all, but I used to, actually implement these systems, and like directly, I'd be in the warehouse doing all this stuff. And when you first start talking to them, they're people are often scared of change and nervous, and you tell them they have to scan everything. Like, I can do that way faster on paper and everything else. And by the time you get through it, they realize that this is actually going to save them time. And if you empower them to sort of, provide you the feedback on things that aren't working, actually people love it. They end up loving going to the more technologically advanced, if you will, solutions. Anything moving from paper is probably more technologically advanced, but they do realize that, yes, maybe on a per item basis, it takes me a little longer to go beep and check the screen versus just mark a checkbox on a pick ticket. But overall, it's going to save them a lot of time in the long run.
But you're right, because there is a hesitancy towards moving towards the technology, but once they get in there and once they see what it can do for them, and not necessarily the speed at which they can pick something, but the accuracy of what they can pick something. That's when I think they have an aha moment, and the eyes light up, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, I got it. Now, in training, to your point, I tell my clients you can't train enough, okay? Because these systems are only as good as the people that use them. And if the people that use them are not trained up on these systems, then the software and the investments you just made in technology are worthless.
Exactly.
So if you're going to cut in a project, don't cut it in the training area. Okay, we'll minimize the functionality if we have to, but don't cut the training out, because that's so important. So, and I'm sure you've witnessed that many a time. Yeah. All right. Let's see here. Maintenance. Okay, we've got lots of things going on out in the warehouse, potentially lots of equipment. It could be conveyor belts, it could be forklifts, it could be, racks that, have been in there for a while. Maintenance practices and protocols to keep any kind of equipment and infrastructure in good condition. What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, that's another tough one, because it's kind of all over the map. But yeah, obviously, racking is going to be easier to maintain than an ASRS or a VLM or something like that, but an automated storage and retrieval system. But the typical ones are forklifts and pallet jacks and things like that need periodic maintenance. And I think the best practices there are pretty straightforward. You've got your preventative maintenance program in place. And scheduled maintenance on that, and having a integrated asset maintenance system within Business Central is very handy, because part of that is, again, you can set it up so that I can track how many hours potentially this thing is scheduled for picking, like if I've got a forklift or something like that. And that kind of gives me, predictive. It's not quite the same as what most people call predictive maintenance, but I can see, hey, in a week I'll have spent 100 hours more on this piece of equipment because I know what picks are coming through that need it. I could start looking at scheduling that maintenance, before I actually look at the counter on the piece of equipment and see where it's at.
Yep.
So, all of these things could tie together. But again, having that integrated system really helps a lot with spare parts, procurement, and all those sorts of things. But as far as the practices go, I think everybody is likely aware of, best practice on the maintenance side. You want to do the, periodic preventative maintenance. We've got the ability now to do sort of the predictive maintenance as far as estimated hours or counters, those types of
Right.
things as well.
Yeah.
And of course, documentation, Business Central and SharePoint, using something like that to maintain your documentation. There's a lot of AI stuff. We have some AI stuff on maintenance where you've got, on your handheld device, a trusted advisor, because it's the AI that's read all the maintenance documents and can tell you what to do or why something isn't working, right? So lots of options coming up for, on the AI side of things, which we haven't touched on.
Oh yeah, no, and that's a whole nother. We could spend a whole nother hour on that. But I tell people on the asset side, you've got the ability within your system to track your assets, and the easiest thing to do is when you buy an asset, okay, and it's a fixed asset, to go ahead and set those things up. You're bringing the asset in, you've paid for the asset. Why not set it up as a fixed asset? Why not set up warranties in there, maintenance schedules in there? And if you do that, the system can produce the type of reports that you want in a proactive manner. But we still have lots and lots of clients that manage all of their assets in this thing called Microsoft Excel, and a little bit harder to keep up with and be predictive on those types of things. Now, again, you want to go to the opposite side from Excel to AI and Internet of Things, and that's where you get really predictive. But a lot of our clients they're still in Excel. And we're trying to get them just at least the next level of, okay, track it in a fully integrated system that can produce reports on when you've got it, your maintenance schedule should look like.
Exactly.
And then we can start getting more fancy at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry, just to expand on that. And, the problem with implementing an integrated, system, that's why people like Excel or just sheets of paper, is it's hard. Lots of people want to do it the right way and have some sort of integrated system where they can plan everything out. It's hard to implement. So, something that makes it easy to get up and running quickly is just great, because, not to generalize, but a lot of the millwrights and the mechanics that are out there dealing with this stuff, they're not technologically savvy, right? They're turning wrenches, they're used to paper, and again, I'm generalizing a little, younger people coming in are a bit better, but it's a heavy lift often to get those asset maintenance systems in place within Business Central. Now, not to make this a plug for us, but we do have something that makes that a lot easier coming up. So we can talk about that later.
Good. I'm excited to hear more about it, because I think it's another area where organizations can really benefit from. So let's talk about inventory management practices and whether or not they're effective, because it's I always like to call demand planning and forecasting kind of half art and half science. And so we're always trying to figure out what are the right numbers, what are the right levels, okay, so that we don't have excess stock, because that's just cash sitting out on shelves somewhere. And we don't want stockouts, because that impacts revenue, it impacts customer sat, all those types of things. So recommendations there, approaches that you've seen that have worked well. And again, there's a lot of them, I know. I just opened up a can of worms there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I used to be in that world, right, with parts management, inventory management, things like that. But yeah, it is half art, half science, and there's a ton of good ISVs out there that provide add-ons for sort of getting you to that level where you've got your magic number for stockouts or customer satisfaction, and they try and help attain that. And then on the operational side, once you've kind of got those stocking levels in place, determining whether you're actually managing your inventory appropriately. It's great to say yes to get 95% fill rate. This is the inventory I need. Well, how do you know you actually have that inventory? Well, you got to have good systems in place in the warehouse, right? For again, the boots hitting the ground. Are they picking the right product? Are they losing it? Are they, what's going on down there, right? Like, can I do a 95% fill rate with what I have, with what I think I have, do you actually have that? So, things like cycle counts, regular cycle counts, scheduling those periodically, daily, weekly, whatever, especially on the higher volume items, those types of things, even potentially doing, count backs where pickers are actually doing mini cycle counts as they go, those types of things, are handy for making sure that what you're basing your decisions on from a procurement perspective, are actually the reality in the warehouse. So yeah, making sure you do those cycle counts or regular physical counts is very important. And then of course, based on all that, you can set your reorder points, your stocking levels and everything else you need to.
Well, and to circle back around to the ability to do those cycle counts and on a more regular and repetitive basis is so much easier with the barcoding technology. Okay. It's not like we're shutting the warehouse down at the end of the month. We're all coming in on a Saturday and we're physically counting inventory by hand. So the ability to leverage the barcode technology to assist in that process and therefore to potentially perform that process on a more regular and repetitive basis because it's not such a overwhelming task is just a tremendous benefit to the organization as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, the inventory counts are almost pay for the entire system if you're doing those full physicals. We had one client a few years ago that everything was serialized. They had thousands of serial numbers, and they would count for a week and then spend several more days reconciling. And they went to the barcoding, and their count was done in about a day and a half and reconciled that afternoon. So massive, massive savings and better accuracy and everything else. So yeah, the barcoding is nice. And for certain customers, that's where RFID could be handy as well.
Right.
Warehouse, it's a little tougher, but if you have retail outlets, if you're a retail store, and you have the ability to do the RFID tagging on the product that's out there, man, that makes inventory counts easy. I hold down the trigger on the RFID scanner, I walk around, and I've done my count. Like it's pretty sweet.
Spin around in a circle and I'm done, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when it works great. You just have to be careful about your expectations and the environment that you're bringing that RFID into.
Right.
Because it doesn't work for everybody, right? It's
yeah.
It's got a ton of promise, but it's it has its limitations.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, so moving into a couple of different areas, we love to measure. Everybody loves to measure. Okay, and I think there was a famous saying. I think the founder of lean manufacturing said, if you don't measure, you can't improve. So we're always looking at ways of measuring it, and it's getting harder and harder because we're collecting so much daggone data that what do you look at? What are the numbers that I should be really focused on? And so KPIs, what are you seeing out there when it comes to key performance indicators specific to the warehouse and your warehouse operations?
Yeah, so I mean, again, a lot of it boils down to well, actually, let me start a little differently. A lot of people want to track, pick times, like how long does it take me to do the picks and things like that, and those are valid KPIs, but and that's starting at the very basic level. How do I reduce my material handling costs within the four walls? And it's a valid KPI. However, it might, in some cases, and again, it's not a one size fits all type approach, but starting with where the money is, right? So where are you going to, how do you measure? If I'm making or losing money on this, and definitely as we discussed earlier, that travel time is a big cost, but the missed shipments and missed picks is another one. So often, and it's an easier KPI to gather in some cases. So how many times prior to investing in a system am I doing a missed ship? Like what is the cost of returns and everything else? And missed picks as well potentially are easier to manage if you have a secondary activity where somebody verifies the pick before it gets shipped. How many times does that happen? Because I can go out there and I can measure, yes, it takes this person 5 minutes to execute this pick, but really it takes 10 minutes because it didn't pass QC because it didn't pick the right stuff, and now it's taking another 5 minutes. So you don't necessarily get that full picture until you maybe start at the higher level KPIs, like what's happening at the tail end of that process, and then drilling down into, okay, we've got X amount of missed ships or missed picks. drill down, get those dealt with, and then, look at some of the lower level KPIs. But, inventory accuracy, order picking accuracy, shipping accuracy, capacity utilization maybe in there,
Right.
those types of things.
Right.
There's a whole bunch, and luckily there's a ton of dashboards out there on Power BI for Business Central that kind of give you these things, and even not for Business Central, sort of build your own dashboard type of solutions that you can tie into your own data to build out these.
Well, that's the beauty of it, is if we're capturing that data, one, we can report on it, and if we can report on it, we can certainly put it out there in highly highly visual type format in the form of a dashboard, or a Power BI visualization, those types of things. So it takes that data, like I said, we all have data. I started off with this, and our goal, within our organization is, okay, how do we help our clients turn data into information into knowledge? Knowledge I can act on. Okay, data I can't. Okay, and so I'm trying to get data into knowledge, and by taking it and putting it into these dashboards with these visuals, with the drill down capability, really, again, we've seen just tremendous results within our customer base when we're able to do those types of things. But you got to start small. To your point, I can't, if all the information that we need is sitting in a printed off version in your desk drawer, guess what? We can't do much with it. So we've got to get it into the systems. We got to get it institutionalized, systemized, so that we can offer those resources. KPIs, if an organization, distribution organization's out there and they're looking for KPIs and they're looking for maybe benchmarks against companies like them, I'm thinking maybe like a Warehouse Education and Resource Council might have some of that. NAW, National Association of Wholesale Distributors. I would assume that I think I've seen some studies that they've done in the past. Is that a good place, you think, to go to?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we did some of that research earlier on, and to try and find those same benchmarks, and it's something that we've investigated doing as well. Basically anonymizing some of this data and allowing people to benchmark themselves against other organizations. We haven't pulled that trigger quite yet, but that may be on the horizon. But yeah, industry wide, there's resources out there that kind of do have some of those benchmarks as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think I had a couple more questions here, but we already kind of touched on something. We got into the data analytics component of it, and talking about some of the tools and performance dashboards, predictive analytics. And I think you mentioned continuous improvement, always taking a look at these things and just saying, okay, what else can we do? It's not I start, I stop, I'm done. Okay, this is a journey. And unfortunately, the journey sometimes doesn't have an end destination, and we've got to realize that. But the data that we have now, and maybe this is a good segue into AI, the data that we have now, we've got a ton of data, almost too much data for the human mind to really comprehend. And so our ability now to bring AI to bear, especially when you're in a cloud-based solution and you have the ability to leverage the resources that are available in the cloud. I tell my clients, they're like, oh, AI. And I said, well, you're still on premise. You can't do it. Okay. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, AI requires two things. It requires lots and lots of data and lots of computing time. And you got the data. Okay. There's no doubt about that, but you don't have the computing capacity, with your on-premise servers. So this talk about moving to the cloud is not only a benefit for the systems that you use on a day in and day out basis, but also for a lot of this data analytics and the benefit of, artificial intelligence and Copilot and all those great and wonderful things that we're hearing about right now. Would you agree with those thoughts?
I would, yeah. I think, it's still in its infancy, but we're almost at the watershed moment where things are going to, you're going to see this explosion of AI capabilities within Business Central and elsewhere that are going to do those sorts of things for you. Do some of that analysis, help you with your day-to-day. And then, we've already embedded, a whole bunch of AI stuff in our products. And that's just going to keep growing.
It really is. And that's why, I've been in this business for a long time, and, it keeps me engaged and excited because things like this come along, and I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I'm like, wow, okay, what can I do with this now? Let me try to figure this out for ourselves, for my company and for my clients. And this is the exciting stuff to me when this kind of change comes around, and you really, it's so dramatic that you really can't even conceptualize all the possible end use scenarios. I mean,
Exactly.
we've got some cool ideas, but we haven't touched the tip of the iceberg at this point. So, all right. So again, we talked about systems as well. So, looking at warehouse management solutions, WMS is always a good starting point when it comes to these types of things. We talked about mobile devices, handheld devices, shipping automation, inventory account systems. So I think we've touched on the solutions and the fact that making these types of investments when you're ready can show dividends. And I think both you and I can show that the ROI is pretty significant and pretty fast. So those things are exciting as well. So any final thoughts, Mark, that you have? I know we've covered a lot in a relatively short period of time here, but any final or closing thoughts?
No, well, I could keep going for a long time.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, just one last thing to just touch on those systems. Yeah, good point. When you're ready for them. And the nice thing is there's lots of, I don't want to necessarily call them entry level systems. There are lots of powerful systems available especially if you're in the cloud, either free or very low cost, to start working on getting your feet wet with some of these capabilities and processes, tools for shipping, for warehouse management, all those sorts of things that don't actually cost you a ton of money to get started with. So, when you're ready, that's important because you don't want to jump into things you're not ready for, but cost shouldn't be a factor in sort of getting into these systems to improve your operations.
No, it's the cost of entry is so much lower now than it used to be. I mean, these were, 10, 15 years ago, these were tools for big companies. Okay. And that's no longer the case.
That's right.
It's very, very cost effective. And I'll throw InsightWorks a little plug here. And you guys do a great job of offering like one or two handfuls of free apps out there that people could say, okay, I'm not sure. Let me stick my toe in the water. And you guys have done a great job of putting these high value free applications out there that people can just download from, I guess they're on AppSource and Microsoft,
Yep.
And test them out and say, hey, this does what I need to do. Or now that I've understand that, I want more. And then the ability to scale up from there. So you guys have done a great job in helping the market out and providing these free solutions that are out there. So, all right, I think we've kind of covered this topic fairly well. Mark, I always enjoy talking to you. Your insight is always extremely valuable to me, hopefully valuable to the audience that we have here today. So again, I do thank you for your time, and thank the audience for taking the time to listen to us. If you have any questions of either one of us, you can reach out to me. I won't put Mark Hamblin on the hook. Reach out to Mark Munson if you have any follow-on questions or need to talk to somebody further. Otherwise, thank you for your time and look forward to having you in attendance at one of our future video podcasts. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.